What are some of the biggest scams to have happened in history? Story 1. American hospital billing. The minute you ask for an itemized receipt and breakdown, they start removing charges left and right, and the bill gets reduced by 30%. When we first moved to the US from Canada, the hospital billing was like a new language. Our twins were born on a Sunday, and on Tuesday morning, my husband got a bill from one of the neonatologists. He called them and asked about it. Their response was that the baby wasn't on our insurance. Well, he explained that we had 30 days to add them to the insurance, and that they did not yet have names. Ridiculous. Related incident. I was a high-risk pregnancy and had to go to a special hospital for extra screenings every 3 weeks. When the twins were 6 weeks old, we got a bill from said hospital for nearly $8,000. I called and asked for a breakdown. Long story short, every time I called either the insurance or the hospital, a new bill or statement was generated. This required more inquiries and then more statements and bills. I had a stack over 2 inches high. I calculated that we owed something in the $300 to $400 range. In the end, the hospital offered me $116. I got out the credit card and paid it right then. It took me 7 months. What do people who don't have multiple university degrees and persistence do? Really a scam. American healthcare itself is a joke. You go in with a paper cut and next thing, you know you have to sell your house. Story 2. When it comes to BS, big time, major league BS, you have to stand in awe of the all-time champion of false promises and exaggerated claims. Religion. No contest. No contest. Religion. Religion easily has the greatest bullshit story ever told. Think about it. Religion has actually convinced people that there's an invisible man living in the sky who watches everything you do, every minute of every day. And the invisible man has a special list of 10 things he does not want you to do. And if you do any of these 10 things, he has a special place, full of fire and smoke and burning and anguish, where he will send you to live and suffer and cry forever and ever till the end of time. But he loves you. He loves you. And he needs money. He always needs money. He's all powerful, all perfect, all knowing, and all wise. Somehow just can't handle money. Religion takes in billions of dollars. They pay no taxes, and they always need a little more. Now you talk about a good BS story. It's a real shame people's existential fears were monetized. However, this is falling apart day by day as younger generations grow up. Story 3. Piggyland. It's not the biggest scam, but my favorite. In Toronto in the 50s, a guy came up with a great investment idea. He would sell people piglets, but also charge extra upfront for their food, care, and more. He would take care of their pig on his farm, and when it was full grown, the investor would sell it for a nice profit. He sold thousands of piglets. People would even bring their kids up to the farm on the weekends to visit, and the parents would be happy to see their investments growing. They weren't allowed in the barn, but he had a nice meeting room set up where they could play with their pig. Then one day, the owner took off to Germany with millions of investors' dollars and was never heard from again. It turns out he only had a dozen or so pigs in different sizes. When people came to visit, they all saw the same few pigs. Story 4. The Bree X mining scandal. A Canadian mining company claimed that they had found 200 million troy ounces of gold. That would be worth $257 billion today in Indonesia. In 1993. At their height, the company was valued on the Nasdaq stock market at $6.9 billion. The geologist who reported the 200 million troy ounces of gold was shaving his wedding ring into the drill core samples and making it look like all of the cores had an incredible amount of gold in them. Eventually, in 1997, another big mining company that was looking to acquire Bree X did some due diligence and found that not only did their drills not detect any gold, but that the gold flecks in Bree X's drill samples were angled and sharp, unlike flecks of gold that would be produced naturally. They concluded Bree X were salting their samples. Company got exposed as a fraud. The geologist who shaved his ring and made hundreds of millions off of selling stock reportedly ended it all after he was found out. His reported method was jumping out of an Indonesian military helicopter, and magically his hands, feet, and you know what were surgically removed, and the body was unrecognizable. Yeah, this guy definitely didn't pay off the Indonesian military to fake his own death. Lawsuits hit the company that went bankrupt almost overnight. The CEO fled to the Bahamas, had his house broken into by masked gunmen who threatened to end him unless he turned over the money he owed them. He apparently passed due to a brain aneurysm 3 weeks after the break-in. There is a movie about it that came out in 2016 with Matthew McConaughey, and now we have a lot more regulations and requirements for mining companies in Canada that want to be listed on stock exchanges and go public. As evil as this is, you gotta give the man his credit for financing everyone alive. While an awful thing to do. My lord, that man is a genius. Story 5. Religion. See, there's this thing that nobody but me can see, and it talks specifically to me, and it gives me good advice on how to live my life, and good advice on how you should live yours. And I'm going to give you that good advice, but because I'm going to spend all day giving you good advice that is completely indistinguishable from my own personal opinion, I don't have time to actually get a real job and work, so I'm going to need everyone else to pitch in just a little bit of their income to pay for my living expenses. Yes, I know that if 1,000 people pay me 10% of their income, I would be making the same as 100 times the average of those people. No, I don't see a problem with that. And if you do anything I think is bad, you're going to be in pain forever, and everything in your life is going to be miserable. And I'm going to convince the entire community to treat you like crap completely out of love. I mean, really, I still struggle to figure out how anyone was dumb enough to fall for this stuff in the first place. It certainly stems from naivety and wanting some form of comfort. Story 6. Man, I really hate the Grand Catholic Church. So many comments here about religion and churches that demand money so you can go to heaven. They did the Crusades, set the world back 2 centuries or more of technological advancement, controlled and oppressed everyone through the government, and they did the whole pay money or you'll go to hell. Yes, churches take donations and request that you give money, but the purpose historically was welfare. They would feed and help the poor and sick and needy, and that does still happen today at good churches. The money is not buying your way into heaven. You do not get into heaven by doing good deeds or paying your church. You give them money so they can help people in actual need. Of course, con artists and sleazebags saw that and said easy money and went ahead. Hard charisma. Give us your money to go to heaven. Then hoard it all for themselves instead of the original purpose of helping people. In the Bible, Jesus went into the Jewish temples in Rome and saw the corruption there and the merchants and peddlers selling religious trinkets and buying sacrifices for people to make dirty money. And he flipped tables, yelled at them, forced them out. Honestly, I'm not even that religious, but I understand the feelings of people who believe in God and religion as good encouragement for better morals and being good people. Modern religion is falling further and further away and is full of a lot of horrible corruption, but I hate the blanket idea of all religion being a scam. I agree with this view, as there will always be an exception to good faith. Story 7. The dishonest scheme of Mitch McConnell and the Republican Senate, who denied hearings for Merrick Garland on his nomination to the Supreme Court of the United States by the sitting President Barack Obama. The reasons cited were that the country was in an election year, 10 months before a national election was to be held, and therefore the nomination needed to be held over so that the winner of the election could make said nomination. When the same situation arose just 4 years later, on the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, 3 months before the national election, the scam perpetuated on the American public by the same Mitch McConnell and the Republican Senate was to rush a replacement through before the election was held, denying the next winner the same opportunity. This bad faith action by the Republican Senate was the root cause of the overturning by the conservatively stacked Supreme Court of the Roe v. Wade decision, set and upheld by 2 previous Supreme Courts. This dishonesty and disrespect by the Republicans ignited a culture war that is raging in America today. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, guys, let's not get too political here. Story 8. 2020, the world's first $1 trillion scam. Via media and false promotion of fear, statistics, the common cold was used to access trillions in pandemic funds by renaming and then claiming falsely that it was a far greater threat, using public's fear and ignorance to the fact that bat soup is the cure for the common cold in China, and that injections were cheap booster shots from a known bad player in the injection market. This is probably the greatest scam in modern history and dwarfs all others by its scale that to this day is still being exploited by people who will only stay silent on the truth for their share of the spoils. A child born in America today will spend his entire life paying off a debt because his great-grandparents bet their entire saving on markets that collapsed and needed bailing out by robbing the youth of the future. Or maybe this only affects countries that can afford it and loss of life rates actually drop during lockdown as expect. Like I said, guys, I'd prefer we don't get too political with this video. Story 9. College, the pharmaceutical industry, ESG, DEI, global warming, global cooling, climate emergency, environmentalists. Now before you jump on my butt, hear me out. College, there is zero reason that degrees can't be certifications with streamlined coursework. Outside of healthcare and law, most jobs require very little actual training to do, and that training can be done on the internet. Pharma, a good idea. Companies that specialize in creating medications and treatments for humanity. The bad part, BS studies are built to push out medications that are vaguely understood that, in far too many cases, end up harming millions of people every year. ESG and DEI. It's a power play built around bullying governments and businesses around the world into following rules they created, which will constantly change to wield more power over governments and businesses. businesses, to the detriment of the governments, businesses, and the citizens impacted. It doesn't go after who it should, only those they know they can hammer on. It's all about power and money, and will never have healthy results that make a positive difference, only pain. Before I get to the last one, I care about the environment and want people to take care of the planet and to have less of an impact on it. Humanity can do some very simple things to lessen their impact, and we should all be focused on making those changes to our lives. Climate stuff, it's BS and it's grift. The entire planet should have been under a mile-high sheet of ice, been underwater, been scorched into oblivion, or whatever other thing was supposed to be our end. And the pattern is always the same. Get famous people giving heartfelt panic, and then you get some kids to talk about how this is a panic, and then the wave recedes, and we see that we are all still alive, and then maybe 10 years later we are back at it again, ignoring that the experts were wrong, and we get celebrities and kids back at it again. Of course, this was before the internet and social media slamming it into your head, but it's still the same. Difference this time is by getting ESG dug in. It's easier to push changes forward that won't make a difference in the problem they say exists. Oh, we gotta stop eating meat. No more gas vehicles. No more gas stoves. Coal miners should learn to code. Apparently we need to stop farming too. And then we need to all start building new communities where you don't need to leave your community, because that will make everything better. It doesn't matter that those things already exist and are called neighborhoods, villages, towns, and most outside of some hellscapes like New York City have everything in place already, and people already don't travel that far outside of work. Climate stuff is just like ESG and DEEI in that it's about power and money with the added benefit of never having to be right about what you forecast. And I want to reiterate something. We should care about the environment, and we should take care to lessen our impact on it. We should care about the planet and not let companies dump crap into the oceans and land. We should care about making sure everyone has the opportunity to succeed or fail based on their abilities and effort, and prevent companies, governments, and people from getting in the way of people's ability to have opportunity. We have laws that are supposed to do that, and if there is a lacking of a law, we should, as a society, make sure legislation is passed to close that gap. Giving power to unelected people to bully others when they aren't actually being jerks in any way is a bad idea, because once you give a bully that kind of power and let them dictate what constitutes a problem they have, you will find that everything is a problem. Remember, if you let the hammer define what is a nail, sooner or later, everything is a nail. This one was very long, with a lot to digest, but I recommend doing your individual research on these topics mentioned. Story 10. The South Sea Bubble. See, Britain kinda got rowdy during the 1700s, and a good chunk of the 1600s. They got so rowdy that they basically didn't stop fighting until they were broker than broke, with more debt than they could hope to deal with. So what does the ruler of a colonial empire do when their nation is broke, buried under debt, and has no answers on how to solve it? You lie a lot, of course. And lie they did. Well, not the monarchy specifically, but the South Sea Company. See, the South Sea Company was founded as a British competitor to the West Indies Trading Company. You know, the biggest private company to have ever existed. As the name implies, the South Sea claimed to have trading ports in the South American Sea Gulf area, and that would be great for generating revenue, except they didn't. That was all Spanish and Portuguese ports, and the British had zero chance of getting any ports there. So the South Sea Company had no way to actually make money, but that didn't stop them from swindling investors and getting the monarchy to start thrusting national debt onto South Sea Co, while providing them all sorts of special privileges until the British economy and South Sea Co were tied at the hip. A company without any real revenue, tied at the hip. So eventually word got out that the South Sea Co was nonsense, and when it did, the resulting defaults and wealth evaporation made the French banking crisis look like a minor inconvenience. It is directly responsible for the financial hardships that turned the war with the French over America decades after the bubble into the catalyst for the American Revolution, meaning this one bubble coined the world's first financial crash is the indirect cause of all history relating to America. Story 11. In all of history, probably indulgences. The modern equivalent of indulgences are carbon offsets, because realistically, you can't know whether carbon offsets do anything. Like perhaps that carbon offsetting would have happened regardless of your contributions, or perhaps like in the case of King Charles III, the carbon capture never happened in the first place. With the rule of Emperor Constantine, he established Christianity as the religion of Europe and established modern-day Istanbul as a global capital of trade. politics, and worship. The Christian church became not just a religion, but as a kingmaker for future generations. Every single ruler, no matter how great, bent the knee to Christianity. In early Christianity, there was this concept of indulgence. Minor sins could simply be forgiven by any priest at all. But if you had a major sin, you would need to be granted an indulgence. An indulgence was an agreement to do an act of good in exchange for your confession to your major sin and being clear to go to heaven. So if you were a soldier of the army of Charlemagne and you took the life of someone in combat, you could go to a church and they'd give you some community service to do. Fundamentally, indulgences were a force for good in the world in their original format. And then the 12th century happened and the Catholic Church was having budgetary problems. It turns out forgiving everyone for their sins doesn't necessarily fill the bank account. So they created a new term, purgatory. Purgatory is a state of condition where a person is temporarily imprisoned neither in heaven nor hell until they receive enough prayers to release them. Now, if in your final hours you have given your final confession to a priest and you're all cleared, you go straight to heaven. But if you don't, you're in this transitional place that the church kind of made it sound like you're in temporary hell. The church would have moral auditors that would interview your surviving family and friends to figure out how sinful exactly you were, and then they'd add on a few zeros just in case. They could then take your morality number and then subdivide it into various services that could bring you to heaven. If you were really poor, you could say prayers, but the amount of time that you would spend saying prayers was specifically priced to be absurd. Like, please say 8.2 million Our Fathers or Hail Marys. If you had a bit more money, you could do acts or give money to the poor. And this was one of those things where the price tag of how much money you had to give wasn't proportional to your wealth. Like if you were really sinful, your family's entire inheritance would be gone, and then they'd be working the rest of their lives to make sure that you got to heaven. Now here is the scam. For the ultra low price of lowering than all other options, you could buy indulgences. No, you don't have to do the indulgence by yourself. We will submit them to a church-run charity, and with your money, those acts will be carried out on behalf of the deceased. You want charity accountability? How about screw you? Just for asking such a thing, add $100 onto your price of getting out of purgatory in the afterlife, you little rat. Indulgences became so popular in the 14th century that the church simply could not meet their auditing demand. So they began to train princes, government officials, judges, sea captains, and police on how to do indulgence audits. They also trained them to marry people. Corruption grew rampant as there was absolutely no accountability for this. A lesser prince could take your money and then deposit most of it in his bank account and send a small portion off to charity. They also allowed people to make purchases on behalf of a deceased, and so they could just continue collecting money off of a person beyond the amount from the audit and then just wipe their name off the board once they extracted as much as they could. And then comes along Martin Luther. A friar comes to town trying to sell indulgences for a person from another town that has passed. Martin Luther publicly defrocks the monk, meaning strips him of his religious status, and challenges him to a debate and audit to come to amends with how much he has been collecting for this lost soul. After the friar refuses and moves on to the next town, Luther begins to believe that all indulgences are probably nonsense, and that the church has simply become too commercial in religion. The church issues the Exsurge Domine, which censures the works of Martin Luther and casts him to hell if he doesn't stop believing them. The act is received so badly that Lutheranism forms and Protestantism spreads like wildfire, causing unrest across Europe and the world. To this day, the Catholic Church sees nothing wrong with indulgences, only admitting that there may have been some bad actors in the past. The Catholic Church doesn't actively sell indulgences anymore as they're free now, and although they still technically believe in purgatory, they never talk about it. So much so that purgatory itself has become a conspiracy theory among Catholics. See this as a slippery slope. Sometimes believing in God and being a good person is enough. Martin Luther had the right idea. Story 12. McKesson and Robbins financial scandal of 1938. Huge financial fraud operation. A Naples-born lifelong scam artist, Philip Musica, created a hair tonic company in New York City. In actuality, it was a front that was sold to bootleggers who would distill the tonic's alcohol content to make illegal liquor. Out of these profits, he created additional fronts and other fake companies, often looping family into his scams for more legitimacy. He eventually changed his identity and took on a new alias, Frank Donald Coster. After quite a meteoric rise in profits and power, Coster wanted more, to become a presence on Wall Street. He eventually merged his company with a large medicine creation and distribution company, McKesson and Robbins, and became the de facto president. He grew his bootlegging operation even larger through this and thrived throughout the Great Depression. McKesson eventually became the third largest medicine company in the world, and Musica even turned down an offer to run on a Republican presidential ticket in 1936. 1986, the treasurer of McKesson eventually discovered a heap of sketchy financial decisions and transactions, which led to an SEC investigation and arrest of Koster and two others. An investigator recognized Koster's face from a previous arrest, and businessman and medicine magnate Koster was discovered for the old conman he really was, Philip Muzyka, after being tipped off and aware that he was about to be arrested and put in jail for life. Muzyka holed up in his bathroom and got it over with there and then, mindful of the eventual post-mortem fall, so that he would land in the bathtub, lest any red body water get on his carpet. All in all, over $20 million, equivalent to around $330 million in today's money, of the company's $87 million in assets were determined to be fraudulent on their books. It's been said there wasn't a financial scandal equal in scale until the Madoff and Enron trials decades later on in the century, and it was also considered one of the largest financial frauds in history committed by a single person. The Germans even used mention of it in propaganda to show the level of corruption in America. The entire ordeal led to a load of corporate governance and auditing reforms. Side note, a great uncle of mine was a divisional vice president for McKesson out of Chicago and had to go to New York for questioning. He and most other employees were clear of any wrongdoing. People were even smarter back in the day than they are now, oh my god.